Good afternoon, everyone. If you'd like to say hello in the chat, we're going to give it a couple of minutes whilst people, the stragglers, join up. So, yeah, if you want to just say hello in the chat, tell us where you're from, where you're joining from today. Tell us anything else. Okay.
I think that's everyone with us. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay.
I hope so. No one's saying they can't hear us in the chat. Having attended one the other day, I know how to resolve that now, which is helpful.
Again.
Okay, brilliant. Afternoon, Carl. Brilliant. So we're here today, bit of open space, but also picking up some of the topics that were identified in the chat in the 3 previous webinars. So for those of you that haven't been before, I'm Andy Sanford from We Are Lean and Agile, and we help people implement continuous improvement in their organization and give them tools to do it. And I'm here with Lenny, and I'll let Lenny introduce herself.
Hello, folks. My name's Lenny Bedian. I am the director and owner of BW Training, a company that works a lot with local government, private industry, around behaviour, skills, etc. Not so much around the technical stuff, but more around mindset and cultures and that sort of stuff. So nice to see some customers that I've met joining us today. So hopefully this is a new one. This is a new one on me. I haven't delivered specific training around either of these topics. They've become part of a bigger program, but as discrete topics, I've not done them before. So new one on all of us today. So let's see how we get on. Hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Excellent. So quick poll, just to get us started. So how's everyone feeling today? What's the mood like? I think it's fair to say we're all going in cycles through this. So let us know how you're going today. Hopefully we can help a little bit. And when I say we, I mean Lenny, basically, because I'm pressing buttons. Ooh, we're sort of split right down the middle there, really. 50-50, give or take, 60-40, you know, happy or meh and scared.
Hopefully we will improve the meh somewhat. It will be a useful use of your hour today.
Yeah, I think so. Let's move people on. So we're not going to do any more polls today unless we particularly hit upon something that people are asking about and it might be useful and we can add one. Please do use the chat. And same format as ever, we're going to go through presentation and Lenny's going to tell us a lot of stuff that will help us handle change, I'm sure. Second on the handouts, what I thought, because a lot of people have sort of emailed and followed up after the webinars for handouts and things like that. So all of the previous handouts are there. So Lenny's stuff on NLP, the presentations from each one. So the previous handouts are there, as will be this one. So feel free to go into handouts and download at your pleasure. And the final bit from me, just to say, we are now in the middle of a series of 7. It's the hump bit. So there's 3 more to go. Don't forget them. Wellbeing, emotional intelligence, setting goals, and team cohesion. And also, so there is a series. Please do sign up to the series if you're not already. I guess you are, so I'm not going to waste my time. But do have a look at our all webinars area. We have got a couple of spectacular webinars coming up, and we've also got ones that I'm doing. Do have a look there. There's one on Wardley mapping, which is an amazing technique, and also one on lean startup in the public sector, which again is with another amazing expert. So that's it for me. I'm going to just hand over to Lenny, I think. And may I just introduce Lenny and also say that Lenny will be controlling the slides today. So it's another step in Lenny's journey towards webinar goddess.
It's scary. This is super scary. So say goodbye to the internet as you know it, folks. I'm about to blow some stuff up. All right. Thank you for joining us again. I've noticed, Robin, you might be having some technical issues. I'm wondering whether Andy might be able to get onto that in the background.
Yep.
Thank you for your good luck, Carl. I appreciate it. Let's hope by the end of all this, we're all still in one piece. So it's only a question of pressing a button. So I should be okay. All right. So if you remember last time, sort of opened up to a very kind of nebulous question, really, which was, what do you want? What's still missing? What would be useful to fill this session in with? And we always intended to leave it a bit more kind of open-ended so that we could have it as a bit of a review of where we've got to at this point, and also a bit of a mapping out about what you would still like to get from these sessions. And there were two things specifically that were mentioned last time, which, as you can see from the slide, are around motivating self and imposter syndrome, both of which I'm going to explain, both of which I'm going to go through with some kind of technical aid tips and ideas and suggestions. But please do feel free to chip in. As Andy's mentioned, chat away on the kind of chat. It's really important. If we have 15 or 20 minutes at the end, we're going to open it up again. So if there's something completely different that you think, well, I'd really like to talk about X or Y or Z, stick it in there by all means. But we're going to sort of run a bit of an open Q&A towards the end. So we'll see how we get on in terms of time. I'm going to try and make these both work and home relevant. I don't want stuff becoming too work focused entirely, because although most of you obviously are working, we are working for most of us at home, and there is also individuals, or there are individuals here who may not be working. So I don't want to make it too work focused. We're going to try and cover a bit of both, and hopefully I'll make it relevant to both. So we're actually going to start, although I've put these around the wrong way, we're actually going to start with imposter syndrome. So some of you may understand the concept of imposter syndrome. Others of you, it may be new to you. The dictionary definition of the imposter syndrome is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort and skills. So we will tend to assume that applies to work, which you can see an obvious link to work. So if I'm a new manager, I might be kind of looking over my shoulder thinking any minute now I'm going to get found out. People are going to kind of suss that I don't really know what I'm doing. As a coach, I coach so many people, particularly in managerial roles, around that sort of thing. So that kind of, I'm just waiting for someone to find me out that I'm not fully capable or fully confident at this point. Any of you that I know, Suzanne, who's unfortunately not with us today, but I'm sure we'll catch up on this, talked about being a mentor in the role she's in. And very often as mentors, that's what you're dealing with, young, not necessarily young people, but new individuals or inexperienced individuals who need that confidence around their own ability. But you can see how this would also apply at home. So I've mentioned this many times, more out of relief, I think, than anything else. I don't have children, but I can understand that as a new parent, there must be that, am I doing this right? What if I get it wrong? There's no manual. There's no kind of techniques here. I'm just kind of winging it. I'm sure there's more to parenting than just winging it, of course. But the principle is the same. The principle really is actually, we don't know what we don't know. And actually, am I doing this because I'm doing well, or is this just by luck? And we'll talk a lot about the impact of luck on how people might perceive that they're lucky to be in the positions they're in and what that means. So hopefully that kind of explains the principle of imposter syndrome. I think the interesting phrase for me in that one, or the interesting word, and you all know how obsessed I am with language, is the word persistent. I think we all have at some point or another, I would argue it's about kind of modesty. It's really interesting. Heidi's mentioned to you as an imposter syndrome in every aspect. I would argue that's not unhealthy. The question is whether it's balanced appropriately. So you could argue with absolutely no filter around, actually, have I deserved this? Have I worked hard? Am I doing this through my efforts or just because the stars have all aligned? We may become someone we might not like. And we're going to talk about something we call positive intent when we get there in a sec. But it is useful to think about how this might apply throughout every aspect of your both working and home career. And then it becomes, so what do I do about either of those contexts? So hopefully the kind of explanation makes sense. If I've missed anything, if anything isn't clear, I'll catch up on the chat. So don't worry, I'm going to move on. But if you have any questions, please do put them in there. I will pick up on them as we go through.
I've got a quick one, Lenny.
Yeah, please do.
Is there a word for the opposite of imposter syndrome? So those people that are clearly, they've been promoted beyond their capability and are probably wildly unaware of it?
I think there's a couple of bits in that for me. There's something for me around emotional intelligence. So actually, do they recognize perhaps the impact they're having on people or their inability perhaps to do their job? And secondly, and we haven't covered this explicitly, so maybe at some point we need to kind of put this in. How can anyone be aware of anything if others around them are not informing them? Now, I work a lot in organisations with massive hierarchy, particularly local government. Any of you that work in local government know local government is predicated on its hierarchy. How do I say to my service manager, my head of service, my director, that actually your behaviour is having an impact on me, or that actually you're not doing the job that we expect you to be doing? With the best will in the world, that is not an easy conversation. And that's the same at home, in life, in anything. How do we unload our emotions around other people's behaviour in a way that doesn't just come out as a crazy person? We've all been upset by other people's behaviours or lack thereof. The skill is, how do I articulate that to someone in a non-confrontational, non-aggressive, not likely to get me sacked or punched kind of a way? So there's something for me about emotional intelligence. Are individuals aware of the impact of their behaviour? And I would argue, chocolate teapot, I would argue if they're not, we all have a responsibility to make them aware. Because actually the easiest thing in the world is to complain about someone behind their back. We've all done it. I've done it. Home life, the universe, everything. We've all done it. And anyone who tells you otherwise, I would suggest is probably not being entirely truthful. It's never easy. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, great, I get to tell someone they're really annoying me today. Marvellous. It's not an easy conversation, but it is an adult conversation. And it is about owning your own emotions and your own stuff and being able to articulate that in an adult way. So I think there's a couple of bits in that for me. And what would we call it? It depends for me on whether it's done with a kind of conscious malice of forethought or whether it's born of ignorance. I would argue if you've got someone in post who knows they're not capable, but is still bullishly going ahead with that, for me, that's arrogance. And this is my point about what imposter syndrome allows us to do. What it does allow us to do is self-check. Actually, have I earned this? Am I doing it right? Is this because of my efforts, or am I riding on the coattails of other people? Now, I would argue, as a manager, as a parent, as a person, the person who can reflect and have those dialogues, those self-check mechanisms, I would argue is going to be a more effective communicator, probably better liked, arguably better at their job, whatever the definition of that job is. But not everybody has that ability. And sometimes we have too much of that ability, whereby it becomes debilitating. And we're so self-critical that we don't get out of that mindset. So for me, it's balance. It's the balance of being able to have a check, have a word with myself, convince myself, if that's not the right terminology, that I am earning this. I have, got there of my own volition, and then move on. That's the bit for me. So does that answer your question, Mr. Sanford?
Yes, that's very good.
I've noticed Anne's asked, is it imposter syndrome if when successful you attribute it to the team or others around you? There's an element of that. I think, again, for me, it's based on what. So if, Anne, these efforts are born of both yours and the team's efforts, well, I would argue that's good leadership. So there's nothing worse than a leader that just says, yeah, it was all me. They were just, superfluous to requirements. If, however, you've made all the effort and then you're attributing to the team, I would argue that's where it becomes unhelpful. Because actually, I think there's a British thing about being a bit immodest and being seen to be a bit boastful. There's a really interesting statistic. I won't ask you because I know we're on a bit of a delay, but 70% of the population have at some point or another experienced imposter syndrome. And interestingly, with the research, and I guess this won't surprise you, of those 70%, 85% of them are women. Now, we could get into why that is. I do a lot of women in leadership programs. I think there is a lot to be said around kind of equality in terms of money and, work-life conditions and et cetera, et cetera. But 70% of the population have at some point or another had these thought processes. So let's move on to look at what we might see in terms of someone's manifestation of this kind of imposter syndrome. So self-doubt, constantly doubting your abilities, even in the face of all the evidence. As a coach, constantly we're striving to get people to recognize what other people see in them. That there is this kind of, and again, as someone's alluded to, that British trait thing, there is often this immodesty in people, this kind of self-deprecating nature that people have, because to be otherwise is to be boastful and kind of arrogant and so not what we want to do, that we almost go the other way and become very self-deprecating and very kind of apologetic. It's not on any of my slides, but one of the first things someone with a low self-esteem and arguably potentially high imposter syndrome will do is start most of their sentences with the word sorry. We've come across people like that in life, in work. The chances are that individual has a little bit of I'm not quite good enough compared to everybody else. So self-doubt is a big part of it. We're going to talk about how do we have some strategies around this. But you may remember when we did the NLP workshop, for those of you that attended that one, we talked about inner dialogue. I think I mentioned it. Apologies if I didn't. Self-doubt is often manifests itself with an internal dialogue. So that I talk a lot in coaching about the angel and the devil. Where does that voice sit? So apologies. I know I wanted to try and leave some time at the end, but I don't think, as I tend to talk a lot, I don't think we'll have a lot of time anyway. If you are a self-doubter, if you are the individual that has that little nagging voice somewhere, there's a really good technique you can do, which is to really focus in on that voice. We're going to reference them later as gremlins, the little kind of internal dialogue. So the first question you need to ask yourself, physically in my head, where is that nagging voice? Physically, where does it sit? So for me, mine is behind my right ear. So if I'm having internal dialogue that is of a negative nature, it's just here, sits just behind my ear. Now, Andy's making a face that I would imagine a lot of you looking at this computer are making, which is, what is she on about?
I just had a drink.
Oh, okay. We'll come into that. The bottom line is, we all have it. Leah said, I have a lot of internal dialogue. What we might not be aware of is all of the content of that internal dialogue. So where does it physically sit? Really interesting question. Whose voice is it? We always assume with a self-doubt voice that it's our voice. It might not be. It could be, I don't know, a schoolmaster. It could be a parent. It could be a child. It doesn't matter whose voice. What's interesting is to find that out. Actually, whose voice is this in my head? So where does it sit? Whose voice is it? What's the tone like? Somebody's asked the question, does it link to cognitive behavioral therapy? Absolutely. Yeah, very much does. Because CBT, emotional freedom technique, and NLP are all predicated on the same thing, which is self-awareness. So fundamentally, whichever of those acronyms you're looking at, it's all about, what am I doing to myself? That's basically it. There is no better advocate for you than you. There is no worse enemy for you than you. The more you can get into the mindset of how do I master myself in a positive way, the more effectively you're going to be able to manage yourself, which is probably easy to say. So self-doubt, in terms of work, you often see excessive work, but actually that's not just in terms of work. I was coaching someone a while ago who was very self-doubting in her abilities as a mother. So she had children, but she then took on 4 stepchildren. And she was turning herself inside out about, I'm not good enough at this, I don't do that, they never have this, they don't have that. And up till 3 o'clock in the morning, prepping lunches for school for the next day. Because that's what a perfect mum does. And I'm not a perfect mum. So I've got to work really hard at making sure that I'm good enough and perfect, which is a ridiculous word, as is the next one, perfectionism, the very high standards and very high expectations of yourself. So the danger with that is you're kind of setting yourself up to fail, because arguably, unless you're really clear about what perfection means, how are you ever going to know when you achieve it? So we're going to do a session. I know Stephen, who doesn't appear to be with us today, asked us last time about goal setting. We're definitely, I think it's not the next session, it's the one after. That again applies to life, the universe, and everything. What goals do you set yourself? Because if you set yourself goals that are not achievable, it is little wonder that you feel as though you're not achieving. Also, if you don't articulate clearly what those goals are, as I've just mentioned, how are you ever going to know when you achieve them? So there's things around both imposter syndrome and motivation. What goals do I set myself? How do I stretch my ability in a kind of stretching way, rather than taking me into an area that I'm really uncomfortable with? So I'm hoping this all makes sense. Nobody's kind of chipping in. So I'm going to crack on, bearing in mind our timings as ever. So ways to live with it. It's an interesting phrase. Recognize these gremlins. So it just says here, you won't get rid of them. And I think that's an important part. Often people, when they speak to coaches or speak to their friends, they say, I just want to get rid of it. I just don't want to be this way ever, at all. None of it. I don't like it, and I want to eradicate this from my being. The bottom line is, it's a very extreme throwing the baby out with the bathwater doing it in that way, because ultimately these things that we perceive to be of a negative nature may well be serving us well. There's a brilliant NLP phrase that says behind every behavior is a positive intention. So when you're shouting at, or someone's screaming at you, angry, red in the face, clenching their fist, clenching their jaw, that anger has a positive intention, believe it or not. Now, the positive intention is for the person exhibiting the behavior. So when you're angry and you're screaming and shouting, I may have to ask Andy this because I'm conscious of our little time lapse. What positive intention might there be, Mr. Sanford, between if I'm screaming my head off at someone? How, in what way is that positive for me?
Well, probably trying to get you to change something or do something differently, or
yeah. Now, what might not be helpful is the way I'm demonstrating that behavior. Behind every behavior, okay, great, that's something I can never get my head around. Well, let's get our heads around it then. What we mean by that is everything we do is born of a good intention. What might not match that is the behavior that goes with it. So let me give you a really simple example. I unfortunately am a smoker. And I went on to a vape for a while. I've kind of reneged and gone back onto the old fags. Now, I will often say to people in training, how is there any positive intention behind smoking? Because I'm not a stupid person. It costs me money. I smell disgusting. I'm overweight, so I'm putting myself in all sorts of kind of categories for heart attacks and goodness only knows what else. You could argue there is no how can there be anything positive in that? Where's the positive in essentially doing something you know is shortening your lifespan? Well, for me, when I'm in training, from the minute somebody walks through the door to the minute everybody leaves, I'm on show, which I know sounds a bit dramatic, but my job is to engage people and to connect with people. So the minute somebody walks through the door, I have to switch into that mode, which means I'm Lenny the trainer from about 8:30 in the morning till probably, if I'm honest, about 4:30 by the time I shove people out the door. That's a long time to be on display and to be on your best behavior. Although any of you that have been on training with me know that I don't tend to exhibit best behavior, but you know what I mean. So for me, having a cigarette when I'm training gets me out of the classroom. I physically go outside, I breathe some fresh air, and I'm Lenny the person for 15 minutes rather than Lenny the trainer for 8 hours. Now, what's fascinating is, since I've been working from home, bearing in mind we're in week 7, 8, you could count on one hand the amount of cigarettes I've smoked. Because I don't need to get out of this environment. Thank goodness. How worrying would it be if I did? So the point is, and I don't know if this is helping Sam or not, but certainly you and I know each other well enough, we can pick up on this at any point. This is about recognizing that everything we do with a positive intention. We are, as human beings, not designed to self-sabotage. We are actually designed to look after our own longevity. It's counterintuitive to do anything else. So although our behavior may not be positive, what's driving that behavior is, as far as the NLP presupposition is concerned, is of a positive nature. Now, as a coach, you have to have that in mind, because sometimes the behaviors people exhibit or talk to you about or articulate are horrendous. I mean, really, really unpleasant behaviors. You know, people with all sorts of omissions in coaching. Now, if I didn't have that belief, I would struggle to work with them. What I have to believe is this person has a positive intention. What they're not doing is exhibiting that intention in a positive way. I hope that makes sense.
I suppose their positive intention could also be negative for others.
Oh, yeah, because the bit that's missing in that statement is the positive intention for the person exhibiting the behavior. It's always me, positive intention. Now, me being me, quite people-y focused, my intention is also thinking about other people. But yes, you're absolutely right, Andy. It doesn't mean that that intention extends to other people. And in fact, as managers, very often those of you that, and as parents, how often do you see your children behaving in a way? How often as managers do you see your staff behaving in a way that you think, well, this is just like a bunch of flipping children? They want your attention. So there's a positive intention. I want love. I want attention. In order to get it, I'm going to share a story that my mum, this will make my mum laugh. One of my favorite stories my mum tells about me is we were going to a wedding and I'd just become potty trained. This is possibly oversharing, but I'm halfway through now, so there we go.
When was that? You were 18, 19?
Yeah, months, yes. And she left me in the bedroom to go and do something, and she came back into the bedroom, and I was covered from head to toe in blue shoe polish, and all I was saying to her was, "I was a good girl, mummy. I went on my potty." The point being, I wanted her attention. At 2 years old, our brains are already going, how do I go about getting attention? And what we know, and there's a load of research around transactional analysis, if you find this sort of stuff interesting, what we know is that negative attention is better than no attention at all. So my positive intent is attention. How I might get it is to behave like an absolute arse. My intention is still being met. Anywho, let's not get too bogged down in that. As I say, by all means, contact me afterwards if I can help in any way. So I've said already, become aware of these gremlins. Where's the little voice? What does it sound like? Whose voice is it? How loud is it? Are there any pictures associated with it? How does it make you feel? What's the tone like? There's tons of stuff you can do around kind of becoming more aware of that internal process. And as it says at the bottom, even a gremlin as unhelpful as the imposter syndrome can be a tool to help you grow. I still argue that lack of any self-awareness, now, again, it's language, is the imposter syndrome, which becomes something that's true. Remember last time we looked at presuppositions, something that has to be true in order for a statement to make sense. But if we think about the word imposter, what has to be true for that statement to make sense? That I'm an imposter, that I'm false, that I'm not being truthful. I would argue it's self-awareness. So just literally changing the language away from this is imposter syndrome to this is me being self-aware, it takes on a different meaning. And this is coming back to your question, Andy, what do you call it when somebody doesn't have imposter syndrome at all? I would argue a complete absence of imposter syndrome, or as I would articulate it, self-awareness, leaves you becoming very vulnerable, very the opposite, very arrogant, very potentially not self-aware. People may be fearful of you, of approaching you, of having conversations with you. And that's not just about work. That's about you as an individual. So self-awareness is not a bad thing. Calling it imposter syndrome is then what it becomes. So being aware of that internal language, that dialogue you use is so important. So how can we sort of go about very simple techniques? Positive self-talk. Self-talk, you don't have to go around saying to everyone, I'm the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, if you want to do that, crack on. It tends not to win lots of friends. But it's not necessarily what you say to other people that can really have a big impact. The biggest impact really is what you say to yourself. What's the last 5 minutes before you go to sleep? What's that dialogue? What's the first 5 minutes when you wake up? I always think that's a fascinating one. What sort of day do you tell yourself you're going to have? Because 9 times out of 10, what you tell yourself is going to happen happens. Because in your head, that's what you're expecting. That's what you're kind of working towards. That's what you've told yourself will be happening. So 5 minutes a day to remind yourself of what you've done, how you've achieved what you've achieved. And again, that's not just about work. That's about you as a person, you as a friend, a parent, a mother, whatever it is. What have you done positively in that day? It doesn't even have to be a massive thing, small thing. Doesn't matter what it is. There's some really interesting research around how the brain responds to positive internal dialogue. And there's tons of research that suggests it improves immune system, it improves concentration, it creates lower blood pressure. I mean, there's tons of stuff around it. I would really advocate a 5 minute a day mindfulness app. Literally 5 minutes of your life. If you can't invest 5 minutes in yourself, I would argue that's a bit of a worry. 5 minutes. Because you're on the flipping toilet. Once again, probably overshared, but there we are. The last one, another point of view. I love this one. If you were hearing your story from somebody else, what do you think you would say? What do you think you would be telling them? Or as it says on the slide, just think of your friend. What do they think of you? What do they view of your being a manager, being a mother, being a whatever it is you are? What if they told you they view of you in that way? The amount of times people have been told and told and told how wonderful they are, I would argue until it comes from you, it's not going to be as impactful. Apologies, some of you will have heard this analogy from me before, but if you think about something about yourself that you really don't like, so a character trait or a characteristic or body part or whatever you want to say. Now, you can't see it actually, which is kind of weird. I always use my psoriasis. I have psoriasis. And I will say to people, what if my belief about my psoriasis is that it was unsightly and unpleasant and horrible and everyone's laughing at me and pointing at me and joking behind my back? If that was my belief, would that belief change if my mum, my friends, my wife, my next door neighbour said to me, it was fine, don't worry about it. It's just psoriasis, it's not a problem. I don't even notice it. It's fine. Worse things happen at sea. I'm going to wait for your answer to this. Would that change how I feel about my psoriasis? Absolutely. And I'll wait for some other answers.
Whilst we're waiting, Lenny, I was. It's all about poo with you today, isn't it?
Yeah, what's going on with me today? Yeah.
I don't know. Do you need the toilet or something?
I'm fine, thanks. I've managed that one already. We're on to ablutions. Really. But God, someone's just tuned in, so Lord knows what they think they've tuned into. It is an obvious question to ask with an obvious answer, which is no, unfortunately not. And people will be very well-meaning. They'll want to make you feel better. They want to tell you how amazing you are. Until you believe it, nothing is going to change. So until I walk into a room and think, I don't care about my psoriasis, I don't care about what other people think, I don't perceive it to be a problem, until we get to that mindset, no amount of platitudes is going to change how we feel. And those of you that are parents know how this works. How many times have you said to your son or daughter, but you're amazing, you're brilliant, you're wonderful. And they go, oh, you have to say that, you're my mum. It doesn't change the thinking. And that's why coaching is so powerful, because coaching works on what are you thinking that's creating this behavior and this kind of repeated pattern of response. Goes back to our NLP model from the other day. And my thinking leads to my behavior, which leads to the results that I get. If I can change the thinking, everything that follows that changes. So I'm just double checking, seeing if we've got any questions. Lots of comments about, yeah, that's me, and I recognize myself in all of that. I wanted to try and keep these as kind of bite-sized as we could, bearing in mind I wanted to cover off both of them and give us a little bit of wiggle room for some Q&A at the end. So that's kind of an introduction to imposter syndrome, a little bit of a kind of what it is, how it might manifest itself, and some suggestions about how you might want to try and start addressing it. Does anyone have any questions, any comments? Anything I haven't explained properly? And again, I am aware you're on a bit of a time lag from us, so I'm going to hang on and wait. I don't want to move on until you've had the opportunity to have a think. Or indeed hold on to the thoughts and we can pick them up at the end. Sorry, Andy, I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was just filling in the time. I find personally that third one, being able to think from another person's perspective, sort of thing, can really help change your mindset. Very
Absolutely.
much so.
There's a technique we call, we use it a lot in mediation, but we use it in coaching as well. A technique called 3 perceptual positions.
Yeah.
And it really is about conflict. So used a lot in kind of relationship management. And it's a really fascinating model. And the idea is that I understand why I'm angry at someone from my point of view. Then I need to step into their shoes and go, well, actually, how might they be feeling? What might they be thinking about the situation? So it's a slightly different application of the model, but it's a fascinating model. Any of you that work with, I use it a lot when I work with people in social care, because sometimes we have to work with service users, not just social care, any walk of kind of life, really. We have to work or engage or connect with people that we wouldn't choose to in any other circumstance. So it's kind of being able to say, well, how are they feeling about me coming into their home, or me being their manager, or just me generally? How does that person view me? Because I know how I view them. What I might not be as good at is stepping back, and actually it's what we call disassociation, being able to disassociate from my emotions around something and consider their emotions around something.
Yeah, it's interesting. Carl's just put in there about getting more comfortable about being me. Well, the funny thing is, I know Carl, we've only met remotely at the moment. We've exchanged emails, and I can honestly say he's a very clever, switched on guy. You know, the sort of stuff he's emailed me is so good. And it is interesting the people you meet that don't have that confidence in their ability. And even though they are very, very capable.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's something I've picked up a lot as a consultant. So, you know, coming in, taking over project teams and trying to build a team that will be there and things like that. And I would often give people more credit maybe than they were due sometimes, but it was very tactical. It was very about, because they were good and they were doing good work, and they just needed that confidence.
And the real skill for me is kind of, if you recognize it in them, how do I get them to recognize it in themselves?
Yeah.
And that for me is the real kind of, that's the move. Somebody's mentioned, I view the concept, that's the 3 perceptual positions, I think, in terms of using with service users, and it's a very powerful technique. But ultimately, with the example you've just given there, Andy, it's kind of, what are the techniques I can use? And we were at one point talking about doing some coaching, some conversational coaching input as part of the webinar. We might add another session on, we'll see how we get on. But for me, it's having some of those simple techniques around, you know, what evidence do you have to support the belief you have about yourself? Good, bad, or indifferent? You know, what makes you think that? How do you know that? How are you kind of measuring that thing that you're saying you have or you don't have? So I think kind of getting people recognition of self is really so important. The problem is it takes much more time. It's a lot quicker to go, but you're brilliant. I've seen you. Come on, let's crack on.
Yeah.
And then people may, you know, I use it a lot when I talk about culture change in organizations. Culture change requires mindset change, which requires time. You cannot just put stuff in place and expect people to engage with it. If you don't take the time to understand what's the mindset around that and help them work through that, at best they'll engage because they have to. At worst, they'll sabotage the process completely. So I think the organizations and the individuals that are prepared to take their foot off the gas a little bit and just go, hang on a minute, how do we get this right, as opposed to how do we do it quickly, I would argue are going to have the most long-term success. The problem is, again, particularly local government, although I'm sure there are other arenas that are the same, we do things at pace because that's what we're expected to do. Comes back to the change cycle from last time. We tend to go straight from confusion and reacting into implementing. What we don't do is test it. Does it work? Actually, is this going to stick? I digress slightly. So I don't see any other kind of comments or questions. So hopefully that all makes sense. We will have, I think, probably 5 or maybe 10 minutes at the end if anybody does want to. Oh, no, we won't. Sorry. Just noticed it's 1:10. But if there are any more questions, or any more bits, just chuck them in the chat for us. So the other topic we were asked to look at last time was self-motivation. I think we can all probably identify with this one at the moment. So again, that's not necessarily about being a worker. That could be your homeschooling. It could be you're self-isolating and you've not had contact with anybody else. And I would argue that's really difficult. How do you get up in the morning, get on with your day, kind of structure it, not go slowly stir crazy, basically. So the adjective we're going to look at is motivated to do or achieve something because of one's own enthusiasm or interest without needing pressure from others. It's an interesting phrase because in terms of, if you just looked at the word motivation, it wouldn't have the same analogy. The self bit is about without needing pressure from others. Now, the reason I mention that is on the next slide, there are two types of motivation that we reference in motivation training. One is an extrinsic motivator. So extrinsic motivators are external to ourselves. So, for example, as the description says, occurs when we're motivated to perform a behaviour or engage in an activity to earn a reward, or, and this is always interesting, or to avoid punishment. So remember, possibly last time we talked about the psychological contract that we engage with, either in terms of our employer or our friends or kind of any situations that we might put ourselves in. And that contract very often has elements of extrinsic motivators. So when you look for a job, the reality is, yes, you look at the content of the job, of course you do, but you also look at how far am I going to have to travel? What's it going to pay me? What are the terms and conditions like? Maybe what's some of the culture like in terms of the organisation. Now, all of those things are things that can be given or taken away. They are extrinsic. They are external to you. Now, they in and of themselves may motivate you to go for the job in the first place. What they will tend not to do is motivate you to stay there. So a bit of a long-winded one, but I just want to give you an analogy that I often use when I talk about motivation. In terms of money, people often say, well, the way to motivate people is chuck money at them. Give them more money, that will motivate them. A brilliant story around this. So there's an old guy who lives on the corner of a street, and the children in the neighbourhood start coming by this corner of the street and chucking abuse at this man, shouting at him and generally being obnoxious. So he comes out on his front porch and he says to these children, if you come back tomorrow and shout abuse again, I'm going to give you all 10 pence each. So they're like, brilliant, wonderful, fab, we'll do that. We were going to do it anyway, let's come back. So they come back the next day, shout abuse at him, he gives them all 10 pence. This goes on for a few days. So by the end of the week, they're up to 50p, which I'm led to believe is big cash. So Friday comes around, they all come back waiting for their 50p, gives them all their 50p, they're loving it. So they expect to come back the next day, says to them on the Friday night, just to let you know, by all means come back tomorrow, you're more than welcome, but I'm not going to be paying you any more money. It's done now, I've paid you, I'm not paying you anymore. What do you think happens to those group of children?
Stop doing it.
They don't come back because the incentive is no longer there. It's become monetized now. So what was something that perhaps before was an intrinsic motivator, something they enjoyed, yeah, we're going to go and shout abuse. It then becomes different. It then becomes something that they have given and ultimately can also have taken away. So actually, if you look at the top 3 organizational motivators, in fact, the top 3 motivators apply to so many different things. I'm just thinking this through. The top 3 in research motivators: appreciation, feeling involved, and help or support with personal issues. And if you look on any research, the vast majority of research, whether it's private sector or public sector, will tell you that those are the top 3 motivators. And they are all about hearts: appreciation, feeling involved, help with personal issue. These are all things that are about my heart and soul, not about cash in the bank. So not to say we're not motivated by money. Of course we are. You know, if you said, come and do this job and it will give you a huge sense of, well, it will give you a huge sense of reward, but we're not going to pay you. My wife's working at the moment with a lot of volunteers around COVID, and you know, the things that people do and the lengths people go to for no monetary recognition whatsoever is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And that's when we move into intrinsic motivators. Intrinsic motivators are about a personal sense of reward, i.e. the behavior itself is what gives me that sense of reward. If you think about what is more likely to motivate you at this point in time, I would argue the second one is going to be more helpful, because the first one predicates I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do this. So it's anxiety inducing. So one of the biggest challenges I think organizations face, but people face generally, is how do I translate organizationally, how do I translate what I as a strategic manager want my organization to achieve? How do I articulate that in a way that gets to the heart and soul of why somebody wants to do it in the first place?
I'm really trying to remember the really good book about this. Is it Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow?
No, I can't remember either. Isn't it good versus bad manager? I can't remember. I'll if I remember, I'll ping you an email because it'll drive you mad otherwise. But there is a ton of research around it that suggests that the organisations that support and do the hearts and minds stuff. I mean, you know, why have we all lost faith in Virgin? Why are we all so up in arms about Richard Branson? Why? Because the man is money, money, money. And at this point in time, when he could be demonstrating goodwill to his employees, he's not. That kind of doesn't sit right, because actually that's about a sense of reward for those individuals. How intrinsically motivated are they going to be after all this to go back and work there? Anyway, sorry. I do try and avoid politics, but I guess you can't help it.
No, it's very true. A lot of lean organizations as well, they don't like bonuses, not large financial bonuses and things like that, because again, for this very reason, they find it actually it lowers performance, because people just get used to it and it's just part of it. And I've never seen anything with
enough money. When do we go, oh, that's good, now I'm motivated, versus that's good, now I want more and more and more and more.
What they do though is give small scale rewards, which gets much more, you know, like the manager coming in with a load of coffees, you know, and there you go, I've got a coffee round, you know, for nothing. You know, there's no...
The number one motivator is appreciation.
Yeah.
In very simple terms, a thank you.
Yeah.
You know yourselves, I guarantee you, a thank you, or I've said it many times on every one of the webinars we do, the biggest incentive for me of doing this stuff is getting feedback, because to hear from people, I got it, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that, or I was excited, that for me personally, is the biggest intrinsic motivator of why I do what I do, because you can see it making a difference. So one of my favorite questions to ask someone is, for what purpose for you do you do your job? For what purpose for you? For what purpose for you do you want to be a good parent? For what purpose for you do you want to be a good friend? But for what purpose for you? Because if you can answer that question, then you're getting to the root of your value set, of what intrinsically makes you tick. Does that make sense, Andy?
Yeah.
So somebody asked me, for what purpose for me? Well, I'm a coach and I'm a trainer. For what purpose for me? Honestly, A, to be liked, B, to make a difference to people. Those are the two things. And if I feel I'm doing those things, I'm motivated. The minute I feel disliked, the minute I don't feel like I'm making a difference, then I'm demotivated. I'm not engaged with something. So for what purpose for you? Anything you do, ask yourself, for what purpose? Not for other people, for what purpose for you? Because that is what will be motivating you, intrinsically motivating. So just something to think about. So extrinsic, intrinsic, the key here is, how do I make what I do in and of itself its own reward? The intrinsic motivator. So there's some tips around this, some things to think about. What impacts your self-motivation? And by that, I mean, really as simple as, you know, if you've not had a good night's sleep, how motivated are you? If you've got a bad back, how motivated are you? But if you're getting into, because I've tried this before and it failed, then I would argue those are the sort of things you can manage. You can ask yourself, okay, so what did I learn last time that I could do differently this time? But it's about identifying what that, back to gremlins really, what is that gremlin? What is the thing that gets in my head and says, I'm just not feeling it today? And we're all there at some point or another. So what impacts on your self-motivation? I really like this one. Are there days in the week or weeks in the week, days in the week, hours in the day, you get what I'm trying to say, where you're less motivated? I think I mentioned last time, afternoons for me are terrible. I droop, I sleep if I can possibly do so, because my motivation in the afternoon is non-existent. 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm wired. I get far more done between 6 and 9 in the morning than I do throughout the whole of the rest of the day. But if I tell myself I haven't done something all day today, then I feel a sense of failure. So recognizing when your flow is, when are you kind of in your groove, and acknowledging there are times when you won't be, and that's okay. What are you learning from, good or bad experiences? I think I shared this with you last time, a lady on a course who said that there's a guy who's in my office and 9 times out of 10 I ask him to do something and he gets it wrong. And my question to her was, well, what are you learning from? And she said, well, 9 times he gets it wrong. I mean, how can I explain it in a different way? I would argue you're going to learn a lot more about the 1 time when he gets it right than you are the 9 times when he gets it wrong. So when are your good days? And what's happening on those good days that you can replicate to your bad days? So how many of you are affected? You know, what a glorious day it is. I'm assuming we've got people in, maybe it's not Scotland. I don't know. You're a long way off. Last time we had someone from Switzerland, and I think we even had Australia represented last time we were online. Rachel, Heidi's sister. You know, it's a glorious sunshiny day. And for most of us, I think it's fair to say that just puts you in a different frame of mind. We live in a country where, unfortunately, a lot of the time we don't have nice sunshiny days. So how can you get yourself in that frame of mind? What can you do? What's that? Oh, it's about to snow. I doubt it, Carl, but I'll take your word.
I think it is this week.
Seriously? Yeah. No. Wow. Well, I could show you, but I'm concerned that I'm going to pull wires out. And it is glorious sunshine on the sunny English Riviera, as you would expect. So, but the point is, what is it that motivates you in a positive way? What is it that puts you in a good frame of mind? Is it when you've had a good night's sleep? In which case, well, then you can only capitalize on that when you have had a good sleep. I would argue one of the main things is what you wake up with. What is that little internal voice? And being aware of it, being aware of saying, you know, I'm telling myself I'm going to have a bad day here. I'm telling myself that this is not good. And actually, how helpful is that? Yes, in Torbados, Heidi, absolutely. So what are you learning from? Are you learning from when things go well? In which case, break it down, write it down, bottle it, sell it to other people. Or are you learning from when things go wrong? And if that's your learning, all you're ever going to do is punish yourself. That's an interesting one. Praise motivates me. Is that wrong? I guess the question, Anne, is for what purpose for you is praise important? Now, that could be a rhetorical question, or it could be a question that you're prepared to answer, or it could be perhaps something you need to go away and think about. But again, it's that for what purpose for me question. So I would argue nothing is wrong if it motivates you, as long as you're not hurting anyone. But I would want to understand why, for what purpose. I'll give you a moment. Maybe you're thinking about it, or perhaps you're thinking, I'm not answering that in front of all these people. By all means, ping me an email. I'm happy to talk things through. So what are you looking for? In terms of how to begin to master self-motivation then, the key bit for me is the goal setting stuff. So actually, if I'm motivated by achievement, then I need to set myself goals. We're going to talk about kind of how we set goals as a later session, so do make sure you get on that one. It's going to be a really good one. Anne has been brave enough to put it out there, so I'm going to pick up on it if you don't mind. So praise improves my confidence and helps me know I'm doing the right thing. Fantastic. So your question was, is that wrong? I think you just answered your own question. I suppose the challenge I would have is, what would happen if it wasn't there? What would you be left with? So if the opposite of being praised means you would lack confidence and means you would question whether you're doing the right thing or not, actually, arguably, it's helpful to have it. What about confrontation as a motivator? That's interesting. I would want to understand that a little bit more, in as much as what's it motivating you to do? Confrontation or challenge, or whatever phrase you want to put with it, to a point can be energizing. And kind of get, I mean, the chemicals that get released when we're in that kind of fight or flight, you know, your adrenaline goes, and yes, motivator, get you going, wired, etc. To what extent, I think, is probably another question, and for what purpose, I guess.
It's interesting. When I used to drive to work at Torbay, I would, the music, and I don't live far away, but the music I put on would be setting me up for the day. You know, if I knew I was going to go in and have loads of rucks, it would be like Eminem screaming obscenities out, or, you know, Nirvana or something like that. But then if it was like a good day, you're on to the happy dance music sort of thing.
Now, the coach in me wants to ask you, what would happen if you'd done that differently? Because actually, was that becoming your reality because you were telling yourself that was the reality that was going to happen?
I know it was very much a conscious thing. When you knew you were going in for a ruck, it was like Eminem. So, you know, just bizarrely, you'd sort of...
But then the question I would have is, was it going to be a ruck, or had you convinced yourself it was going to be a ruck by pumping yourself up?
Oh, no. I'm pretty good at reading situations.
Let's not go into the So, swim with sharks or dolphins? This is a weird question. The question there really around motivation is, who are you associating yourself with? What are the people around you like? I do a lot of work, as I've mentioned already, organisationally, and you get a lot of people using phrases like joy hoovers, mood hoovers, fun sponges, sunshine suckers, people that just kind of sap the joy out of everyone and anyone around them. And you can have people like that in life. That's not just a work context. There are friends, relatives, colleagues that you just think, they just drain me, or it's hard work, or so ask yourself, who's your tribe? Who do you surround yourself with, and what do they bring? I mentioned this guy last time, Damien Hughes. Read the book if you're into that sort of thing, Liquid Thinking. And there's a whole chapter on, do you swim with sharks or do you swim with dolphins? Fascinating read, really, really interesting. See the good and the bad, something we call reframing. And I did want to try and do a little bit in this. It's just, unfortunately, we've run out of time. So, Andy, can you remind me next time to maybe do a slide on reframing? Because I think it would be really useful. And how would you eat an elephant? Well, I would argue with a knife and fork. In other words, if the goal you're setting yourself is enormous, you will more than likely have a sense of failure around that, because if your only sense of achievement is completing this enormous goal, then you're setting yourself a very long-term, very stretching goal. I would argue if you can break it down, first smallest step, I think I shared last time with you the Mark Spitz Olympic swimming partner. He got that down to the blink of half a blink of an eye. What is your goal in half a blink of an eye? What's the first thing you can do? The very first thing, and give yourself that sense of praise for that thing that you've done. What have we done? I love this. I love this phrase. 2 ways to climb a tree. You can wait or you can climb it. In other words, you can wait for all this stuff around you to happen, or you can make it happen. Claire mentioned cognitive behavioural therapy earlier on. And for me, CBT is all around, actually, what can I do? NLP is all around, what can I do? Emotional freedom is all around, what can I do? Coaching is around, what can I do? I can sit and wait, or I can make it happen. I'm not going to get all Tony Robbins and evangelical on you, but I would just say, get on with it, do something, because procrastination is the enemy of this stuff. What have we covered so far? There's loads of stuff we've covered so far that link to motivation. Is the thing I'm trying to change something that's in my gift? Do I have a choice? Because actually, if I've got to do it, then me putting it off is probably not helpful. If I can influence it differently, if I control it differently, potentially that could have a different outcome. NLP, remember, am I deleting? Am I distorting? Am I generalizing? Am I telling myself I'm never any good at this thing? Because the word never is a generalization. And actually, is that true? Are you never any good at this thing? Or is it just today you're having a bit of a crappy day? I mentioned this one last time. I got angry with myself because I couldn't remember who'd said it. It was Henry Ford. So self-talk, if you're telling yourself you can't do something, more often than not, that becomes your reality. So what are you telling yourself you can or can't do? What is that internal process? And the process of adjustment. If you're going through change, you're going through change. And actually, we know there's a bit in that that's all about emotion, confusion, reacting, being unclear about things. So in the 3 sessions we've done already, we've covered 3-4 discrete areas of motivation, and we're going to cover more of them because we're going to be looking at setting goals. We're going to be looking at kind of emotional intelligence. So they all link together. We tried to put a series together that has some natural correlation. Sorry, I'm aware that I'm rattling now, but I'm very aware of our time. What's the first thing you could do today? Literally today. What is the first thing, smallest thing you could do? Now, I had a leap of faith. Andy and I took, both of us, a leap of faith. Oh, sorry, Beck. Not sure about that. Hopefully everyone else is still getting everything. We'll see if anyone else comments. Still good here. And that's Scotland. So if they're still getting it, I would suggest we're okay. Sorry, Beck. Hopefully we can, might be worth, as Andy says, going nuclear, which is to sign out and sign back in again. But so in terms of kind of what can you do, what would give you a sense of achievement for today? What's the one thing you can do? If nothing else, you've given an hour of your time to invest in yourself. You've done something. You've done something today. You've made an effort today to do something for you, which is great. Take that. That's your 5 minutes at the end of today. Today, I took an effort to do something for myself. Tomorrow, I'm going to start being aware of my gremlin. The day after that, I'm going to be aware of when I use deletions or general. Anything you can do is a movement in the right direction, but do something. Climb the tree. And finally, a little Stephen Covey quote for you. If you've not already read it, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Brilliant, brilliant book. Very much worth a read. And this, again, is very similar to a lot of the stuff you've heard me spout over the last 3 sessions. I'm not a product of my circumstance. I'm a product of my decisions. Make a decision that works for you and make it work for you. You are the master of your own destiny. No one is responsible for your happiness or well-being except for you. At this point, over 1 minute over the edge. I would normally at this point be saying to you, let's have a bit of Q&A. Unfortunately, we have, as we thought we would, run out of time. Thank you as ever for joining us. Please do give us your feedback. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. We're interested in anything you've got in terms of the webinars, anything you'd like to see done differently, any additional stuff. Please share them, ping them around, do whatever you want with them. We are back again in 2 weeks with emotional intelligence and kind of self-awareness. There may be a little bit of pre-homework to do with that one, folks. So I'm going to have a think about that one and maybe send you something out beforehand just to give you an opportunity to do a bit of pre-thinking before we get to it. But a really interesting session next time, so hopefully you'll be able to join us. Thank you all as ever. Andy, I'll hand back to you just for our last little slide.
Yeah, and just remind people about having a look at the webinars that are out there, and do come along, do share them as well. Control Dartboard, I think it's near 300 people have now watched that first session, so please do share it with people, because there's a lot of good stuff in here that you know, we can help some of our colleagues with. So thank you again, Lenny, and thank you everyone for getting on board, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Have a good couple of weeks.
See you later.